The fire had long since died when Alara Whitcomb woke to the sound of her own breathing, shallow and careful in the pre-dawn darkness. The stone floor beneath her thin blanket held the mountain cold like a living thing, seeping through wool and cotton to settle in her bones. She was 22 years old, though she felt centuries older, and she had learned long ago that the first moments of consciousness were the cruelest, the brief seconds before memory returned and reminded her of what she was, what she had become, what she would always be. She rose without sound. Silence was survival in Morgana's house. The veil came first, always first. 3 layers of dark gauze that she wound carefully around her face and head, checking twice that no gap remained. No sliver of skin visible in the weak moonlight filtering through the single narrow window. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory guiding fingers that no longer trembled as they once had. 10 years. 10 years since the curse had taken root. 10 years since she had last seen her own reflection without flinching. 10 years since she had been anything other than the veiled shadow who gathered herbs and spoke to no one. The mountains of Ravenfall were unforgiving even in summer, and winter turned them into instruments of slow death. Alara wrapped herself in the threadbare cloak that had been her father's once, back when he still lived, back when she still had a name spoken with something other than contempt or pity. The fabric smelled of wood smoke and the bitter tang of the dozens of herbs she collected daily, crushed leaves and roots that stained her fingers green and black, evidence of her only value in this household. Morgana Whitcomb was already awake. Alara could hear her stepmother moving in the main room of their small stone cottage, the rustle of skirts, the clink of glass vials, the low murmur of words that might have been prayer, or might have been something darker. The respected herbalist of the outer villages, they called her. The woman who could cure fevers and mend broken bones, who knew every plant that grew in the shadow of the peaks, whose remedies were sought by rich and poor alike. None of them knew what Alara knew. None of them saw what happened in the deep hours of night, when Morgana descended to the cellar with her black candles and her books bound in leather that looked too much like skin. Alara's father had married Morgana when Alara was 8 years old, a widower desperate for help raising a daughter alone in this harsh territory, where humans were tolerated but never truly accepted among the werewolf packs. He had died 4 years later, a sudden illness that came on fast and left him cold before the week was out. Alara remembered holding his hand as the fever consumed him, remembered the way he had looked at Morgana with confusion and something like accusation in his final moments, remembered the smile that had flickered across her stepmother's face when his eyes finally closed. She had been 12 years old. The curse had come that same night. The details remained vivid even now, burned into memory with the clarity of trauma. Morgana had called her down to the cellar, and Alara had gone, still numb with grief, still clutching the wooden bird her father had carved for her birthday. The chamber below the cottage was not meant for healing. Symbols covered the walls, drawn in substances Alara did not want to identify. Candles burned with flames that gave no warmth. And Morgana stood in the center of it all, beautiful and terrible, power crackling around her like heat lightning. The curse was punishment and precaution both. Punishment for existing, for being her father's daughter, for having received his love and attention. Precaution against Alara ever leaving, ever telling what she knew, ever becoming anything more than a tool to be used. Morgana had spoken the words in a language that scraped against the ear, had drawn blood from Alara's palm, and let it fall onto something that pulsed and writhed in the darkness. And then the pain had come, searing through her face like acid. And when Alara had finally crawled to the small mirror in the corner, she had seen what she would see every time thereafter when light touched her features. Something twisted, something wrong, something that made her want to claw her own skin away. The curse was selective and cruel. In darkness or shadow, she remained as she had always been, her father's daughter with his dark hair and gray eyes. But in direct light, in the full presence of moon or sun, her features transformed into something that belonged in nightmares. Morgana had been very clear about the rules. If Alara ever revealed the curse to anyone, if she ever spoke of what dwelt in the cellar, if she ever tried to leave, the transformation would become permanent. She would wear that face forever, and no shadow would hide her. So Alara had learned to disappear. She kept her face veiled always, spoke only when spoken to, moved through the village like a ghost. She gathered the herbs Morgana needed, delivered the remedies to those who paid, and returned to her cold room each night to sleep on stone and dream of nothing. The villagers of Thornhollow had their own theories about the veil. Some said she had been burned in a fire. Others whispered that she had been mauled by wolves as a child. A few of the crueler ones suggested she simply was too ugly to show her face, that Morgana kept her out of charity. Let them think what they wanted. Alara had learned that truth was more dangerous than lies. Ravenfall was a kingdom built on hierarchy and brutality, where strength determined survival and weakness invited destruction. The werewolf packs that dominated the territory followed ancient laws that valued power, beauty, and lineage above all else. At the top stood the Alpha King, ruler of all packs, commander of armies, whose word was absolute law. Below him ranged the noble families, each controlling their own territories and people, constantly vying for favor and influence. And at the bottom, far below where even the lowest Omega Wolf might stand, were the humans who lived among them, tolerated as servants and merchants and farmers, always aware that they existed on sufferance. Thornhollow was one of the outer villages, clinging to the mountainside like a barnacle to rock, too remote to matter to the great families, too poor to attract attention from the capital. Most of its inhabitants were human, though a few lower-ranking wolves had settled there over the years, drawn by cheap land and distance from pack politics. It was a place of hard work and harder winters, where people minded their business and asked few questions, which suited Morgana perfectly. Alara pulled her hood up and stepped out into the morning cold. The sky above was still dark, stars glittering like ice chips, but the eastern horizon showed the first gray hint of approaching dawn. She had perhaps an hour before the sun rose, an hour to collect what Morgana needed before the light became dangerous. Her stepmother's list was already burning in her mind, memorized the previous evening. Silverleaf from the North Grove, Bloodroot from the ravine edge, Widow's Hair from the cemetery hill, and Shadow Thistle from the ruins of the old temple. A day's work for most gatherers. Alara would have it done before noon. She knew these mountains like she knew her own heartbeat. Every path and hollow, every place where rare plants grew in the thin soil. Her father had taught her when she was small, back when he still worked as a trapper and guide, back when he had hoped she might learn to love this harsh land as he did. She had learned, though not in the way he had hoped. She had learned that beauty here was accompanied by thorns, that the most valuable herbs grew in the most dangerous places, that survival meant knowing exactly how close to the edge you could stand. The North Grove was an hour's walk, up through pine forest and across a boulder field where snow lingered year-round in the deepest crevices. Alara moved quickly, her eyes adjusting to the darkness, her feet finding purchase where others would have stumbled. She passed the miller's house, dark and silent, then the blacksmith's forge where coals still glowed faintly. A dog barked once, then fell quiet. The village was used to her pre-dawn wanderings by now, the veiled ghost who walked alone. The path narrowed as it climbed, becoming little more than a game trail threading between trees whose roots gripped stone. Alara's breath plumed in the cold air, and her hands beneath their worn gloves had gone numb. She ignored the discomfort. Pain was familiar, expected, barely worth noting anymore. What mattered was the task. What mattered was returning with everything Morgana required, thereby avoiding the consequences of failure. Those consequences had been demonstrated early and often. The first time Alara had returned empty-handed, unable to find a particular mushroom that grew only after rain, Morgana had locked her in the cellar for 3 days with no food and only enough water to keep her alive. The second time, her stepmother had held her hand over a candle flame until the skin blistered. The third time, Morgana had simply smiled and suggested that perhaps Alara would prefer if the curse became permanent. There had been no fourth time. The grove appeared as the sky shifted from black to gray, a small clearing where silverleaf grew in the shadow of an ancient oak. The plant was rare and temperamental. its leaves holding properties that could reduce fever or induce sleep depending on how they were prepared. Alara knelt among the roots and began to cut carefully, taking only what was needed, leaving enough for the plant to survive. Her father had taught her that too, the ethics of gathering, respect for the living things that gave themselves for human use. Morgana cared nothing for such sentiment, but Alara remembered. The bloodroot was easier to find, growing along the ravine edge where water seeped from stone. Its sap was poisonous in large quantities, useful in small ones for treating certain skin conditions. Alara dug carefully, wrapping the roots in damp cloth to keep them fresh. The widow's hair would be more challenging. The cemetery hill was exposed, and dawn was coming fast now, the sky lightening to pearl gray. She would need to work quickly. The cemetery crowned a low hill overlooking the village, surrounded by a broken stone wall that had been old when Alara's father was young. The graves here dated back generations, some marked with carved stones, others with simple wooden crosses worn smooth by wind and weather. The wolves had their own burial customs, but humans were laid to rest in the earth, returned to the soil that had sustained them in life. Alara's father was here somewhere, though Morgana had forbidden her from visiting his grave, had in fact refused to tell her where he lay. Widow's hair grew only on graves, a parasitic plant that fed on decay. Its tendrils were thin as spider silk, ghostly pale, and possessed properties that Alara tried not to think about too carefully. Morgana used it in her darker work, the rituals performed in the cellar when the moon was new. Alara gathered it mechanically, trying not to see the names carved into the stones, trying not to wonder about the people who slept beneath her feet. The sun broke the horizon as she worked, spilling golden light across the hilltop. Alara froze, panic flooding through her. She had miscalculated, taken too long, and now the light was coming and she was exposed. Her hands flew to her veil, checking desperately for gaps, but she could already feel it beginning, the sick crawl of the curse activating against her skin. It was not painful anymore, not like it had been at first, but the sensation was hideous, like insects writhing beneath her flesh, like her bones shifting position, like something fundamental and wrong happening to the architecture of her face. She ran. Abandoning dignity and caution, Alara fled down the hillside toward the tree line, toward shadow and safety. Behind her, an early riser exiting his home caught sight of her veiled figure stumbling through the cemetery and made a warding sign, protection against evil spirits. She did not care. She crashed into the forest and stood gasping in the shade of the pines, hands pressed to her veiled face, waiting for the sensation to recede. It took minutes that felt like hours. Then slowly, mercifully, the curse released its grip, and she was herself again beneath the cloth. Stupid, careless, dangerous. Morgana would be furious if she learned that Alara had been caught in the sun, had risked being seen. The veil would have hidden most of it, but not all. Never all. There were always gaps, always chances for exposure, and exposure meant questions, and questions meant danger, and danger meant Morgana would need to act to protect her secrets. Alara forced herself to move. She still needed the shadow thistle, and the sun was climbing. The old temple ruins were deeper into the forest, a place the villagers avoided. It had been built by the wolves generations ago, dedicated to their moon goddess, but something had happened there during a war long past, and now it stood empty, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Brambles grew through the broken walls, trees had pushed up through the floor, and in the deepest shadows where even noon sun could not penetrate, shadow thistle flourished. The ruins appeared like a mouth in the forest, broken columns standing like teeth, walls collapsed into rubble. Alara picked her way through carefully, aware that she was trespassing in a place considered cursed, even by those who did not know what true curses were. The air here felt different, heavier somehow, pressing down with the weight of old grief and older anger. She found the thistle growing in what had once been the inner sanctum, its dark leaves almost black in the shadows, thorns gleaming like tiny knives. She was reaching for the first stem when she heard the voices. Men. At least 3, perhaps more, their voices echoing strangely off the broken stones. Alara dropped into a crouch behind a fallen pillar, her heart hammering against her ribs. This deep in the forest, this far from the village, there should be no one. The ruins were avoided by all sensible people, considered haunted or cursed or both. Only someone with deliberate purpose would come here, and that purpose was unlikely to be innocent. She peered carefully around the edge of the pillar. Through a gap in the ruined wall, she could see figures moving in what had once been the temple courtyard. 4 men, all wearing the rough clothing of travelers or hunters, but something about the way they moved spoke of violence held barely in check. Weapons hung at their belts, more than anyone would carry for simple hunting, and their voices, when they spoke, held an edge that made Alara's skin crawl. "The shipment comes through tomorrow night," one was saying, a tall man with a scar running down his left cheek. "The king's supply wagons, heading to the northern garrison. Weapons mostly. Some silver. Maybe gold if we're lucky. And you're sure about the route?" Another voice, this one belonging to a shorter, broader man who stood with his arms crossed. "Last time your information was wrong. We nearly walked into a patrol. This time is different. I have it from someone inside the garrison itself. They'll be traveling light, trying to move fast before the next storm hits. Just 2 guards and a driver. Easy prey. Rogues." The word crystallized in Alara's mind with cold certainty. These were rogue wolves, the ones who had rejected pack law and lived outside the hierarchy, surviving through theft and violence. They were hunted wherever they appeared, killed on sight by the king's guards. But they were also cunning and desperate, which made them dangerous. And they were planning to attack a royal supply wagon, which would bring the full weight of the crown's justice down on this entire region. Alara remained absolutely still, barely breathing. If they discovered her here, they would kill her without hesitation. A witness to their plans was a liability they could not afford. She needed to retreat, slowly and silently, and then she needed to decide what to do with this information. Warning the authorities would mean revealing that she had been in the ruins, which would raise questions about why. But saying nothing would mean innocent people might die, and blood on the King's Road would bring investigators to Thornhollow, which would be even more dangerous for Morgana's secrets. She was beginning to edge backward when her foot caught on something, a piece of rubble hidden beneath dead leaves. The sound it made was small, barely more than a scrape of stone on stone, but in the stillness of the ruins it rang out like a bell. The voices stopped immediately. "Did you hear that? Someone's here. Check it out. Now!" Alara ran. There was no point in hiding, no possibility of remaining undiscovered. She burst from behind the pillar and sprinted for the tree line, her gatherer's bag bouncing against her hip, her veil streaming behind her. Behind her she heard shouts and the sound of pursuit. The rogues were faster, stronger, their wolf blood giving them advantages her human body could never match. She would not outrun them. But perhaps she could outlast them. Lose them in the forest she knew better than anyone. She dodged between trees, leaped over roots, slid down a small embankment sending stones clattering. The forest was a blur around her, morning sun slanting through the canopy in golden shafts. She could hear them behind her, closer now, their breathing harsh and their footsteps heavy. One of them was laughing, enjoying the chase. They thought this was sport. They thought she was already caught. The ravine opened before her without warning, a slash in the earth dropping 30 feet to a rocky stream below. Alara skidded to a halt at the very edge, stones tumbling away beneath her feet. Behind her, the rogues were closing in, spread out to cut off any escape. She was trapped between the drop and her pursuers, with nowhere to go and no weapons to defend herself. The scarred man stepped forward, smiling. "Well now, what have we got here? A spy? Someone who heard more than they should?" Alara said nothing. Her mind was racing, calculating options and finding none that ended well. The ravine was too far to jump. Fighting was useless. Running would only delay the inevitable. She was going to die here, in the forest, and no one would ever know what happened to her. Morgana would probably be relieved. "She's wearing a veil," another rogue observed, coming closer. "Why's she hiding her face? Maybe she's pretty. Maybe we should take a look before we deal with her." "Don't waste time," the scarred man said. "She heard us. She has to disappear. Make it quick." He was reaching for the knife at his belt when the first arrow took him through the throat. The scarred man went down without a sound, blood spraying, his eyes wide with shock. The other rogues spun, trying to locate the source of the attack, and 2 more arrows flew from the trees. One caught a rogue in the chest, punching through leather and into his heart. The other missed, but only barely, close enough that the target felt the wind of its passage. The remaining rogues scattered, diving for cover, and suddenly, the forest exploded into chaos. Men in the king's colors poured from the trees, soldiers in leather and mail moving with the coordination of trained warriors. Swords rang out, meeting the desperate defense of the cornered rogues. Steel met flesh. Screams echoed through the morning air, and Alara stood frozen at the ravine's edge, caught in the middle of a battle she did not understand, watching men die within arm's reach of where she stood. It was over in minutes. The rogues fought with the fury of those who knew they were already dead, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. One by one they fell, cut down by soldiers who showed no mercy. The last rogue, the broad man who had questioned the intelligence, tried to run and was brought down by 2 arrows in the back before he had taken 10 steps. Silence fell over the forest, broken only by the harsh breathing of the victors and the distant sound of the stream below. Ilara remained motionless, afraid that any movement would draw attention to her, would remind these soldiers that she existed. They were king's men, which meant they served the crown, which meant they had the authority to do whatever they wished to anyone they encountered. And she was a veiled woman standing in a cursed ruin who had been present when rogues were planning treason. The questions they would ask were questions she could not afford to answer. One of the soldiers moved among the fallen rogues, checking each body to ensure death. Another was wiping blood from his sword, his face expressionless. A third was retrieving arrows from the corpses, practical and efficient. And then a fourth figure emerged from the trees, and Alara's breath caught despite herself. He was taller than the others, broad-shouldered and moving with a predator's grace. He wore black leather and dark wool, fine quality but practical, and a sword hung at his hip that looked like it had been used often and well. His hair was dark, touched with gray at the temples despite what seemed like relative youth, and his face was hard and angular, carved from stone and shadow. But it was his eyes that held her, pale gray like winter ice, scanning the scene with an intensity that seemed to miss nothing. This was not a common soldier. Everything about him, from the way he moved to the way the others deferred to his presence, spoke of authority and power. This was someone important, someone dangerous, and he was looking directly at her. "You," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "Step away from the edge." Alara obeyed automatically, her body responding to the tone of absolute authority before her mind could catch up. She moved 3 steps forward, away from the ravine, and stopped. The man approached slowly, studying her with those unsettling eyes, and she realized with a jolt that he was scenting the air, using senses she did not possess to gather information about her. "A human," he said, though whether to her or to his men she could not tell. "Female, alone in the forest at dawn. Explain yourself." The words stuck in Alara's throat. She had learned over the years to speak as little as possible, to draw no attention, to be invisible. Now she was being directly addressed by someone who expected an answer, and the weight of his gaze felt like a physical pressure against her skin. "I gather herbs," she managed finally, her voice rough from disuse. "For the village healer. I did not know anyone was here. You were in the temple ruins." It was not a question. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew. Ilara's mind raced. Lying would be worse than useless. This man would see through any deception as easily as seeing through glass. But the truth was almost as dangerous. "I needed shadow thistle," she said quietly. "It grows only in deep shade. The ruins are the closest source. And you overheard the rogues planning their attack." "Yes. Did you recognize any of them?" "No. I have never seen them before." The man was silent for a moment, still studying her with that unnerving focus. Then he glanced at one of his soldiers. "Marcus, Check the ruins. See if there are any others hiding there." The soldier nodded and disappeared into the trees. The others began the grim work of dragging the rogue bodies together, preparing to burn them. It was standard practice, Alara knew. Rogues were given no burial rites, no return to the earth. They were destroyed completely, erased from the world as they had erased themselves from pack society. The dark-haired man turned back to her. "You wear a veil?" "Yes." "Why?" The question was direct and unavoidable. Alara felt the curse stirring against her skin, responding to her rising fear, to the sunlight filtering through the trees. She kept her hands still with an effort of will, refusing to reach up and check the cloth, refusing to show weakness. "I prefer it," she said, which was not quite a lie. "You prefer to hide your face from the world. I prefer privacy." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face, there and gone in an instant. Privacy. In a village where everyone knows everyone's business. An unusual luxury for a herb gatherer. "Perhaps that is why I value it." He studied her a moment longer, then nodded slowly, as though coming to some decision. "What is your name?" "Alara Whitcomb." "And the healer you gather for?" "Morgana Whitcomb, my stepmother." "I know that name." His voice changed slightly, became more thoughtful. "She has a reputation. Skilled, they say. Perhaps too skilled for a simple village herbalist." Alara said nothing. Anything she said now would be a mistake. Morgana's reputation was deliberately cultivated, useful for her business, but also dangerous. There were always those who questioned, who wondered, who looked too closely at success and saw shadow beneath. The soldier called Marcus emerged from the ruins, shaking his head. "Nothing, my lord. No one else present. But there are signs of regular use. Someone has been camping there. More than one person." "Recently, within the last few days," the man's expression darkened. "More rogues. They are using these mountains as a base, which means there are more than we knew. We will need to sweep the entire region." He looked back at Alara. "You will come with us." Terror shot through her like ice water. "No, please. I have done nothing wrong. I did not say you had. But you have information, whether you realize it or not. You know these forests. You have been gathering herbs here for years, I assume. You have seen things, noticed patterns. You will help us find where the rogues have been hiding." "I cannot. My stepmother needs the herbs I was gathering. She has customers waiting. If I do not return, your stepmother will survive one day without your services." His tone allowed no argument. "This is not a request, Alara Whitcomb. This is a necessity. Rogues are planning to attack the king's supply line, which means they are planning treason and murder. Every hour they remain free is an hour in which good men are at risk. You will help us find them, and then you will be returned safely to your village." Alara wanted to refuse, wanted to run, wanted to disappear into the forest and never be found. But she was surrounded by armed soldiers, faced with a man whose authority was absolute, and she knew that refusal would only make everything worse. If she cooperated, if she helped them, perhaps she could escape this without too much damage. Perhaps Morgana would understand. Perhaps the curse would not be discovered. She was already lying to herself, and she knew it. "I will help," she said quietly, "if I can." The man nodded. "Good. My name is Alaric Thorne, and you have just agreed to assist the Alpha King of Ravenfall in hunting traitors. I suggest you do not come to regret that choice." The world seemed to tilt beneath Alara's feet. The Alpha King. She had been speaking to the king himself, the ruler of all the packs, the most powerful wolf in the kingdom. And she had been caught at a massacre, had overheard treason, and was now being conscripted into service by the one man in Ravenfall who could command absolutely anyone to do absolutely anything. This was worse than any nightmare she had ever imagined. This was disaster incarnate. King Alaric was already turning away, issuing orders to his men. Burn the bodies, scatter the ashes, send word to the garrison about the planned attack, double the guards on all supply wagons for the next week, and someone get the girl something to drink. She looks ready to faint. One of the soldiers approached with a water skin, holding it out to Alara. She took it with shaking hands, raised it to her lips beneath the veil, and drank. The water was cold and clean, and did nothing to calm the panic churning in her stomach. She was trapped. She was caught. And she had no idea how to escape this without everything she had hidden for 10 years being dragged into the merciless light of day. The king was speaking to another soldier, a young man with red hair and a captain's insignia on his shoulder. "Connor, take half the men and scout east along the ridge. Look for camps, fire pits, anything that suggests extended occupation. Meet us back at the village by nightfall." "Yes, my lord." The captain saluted and moved away, selecting men with quick gestures. Within minutes, half the soldiers had melted into the forest, leaving Alara with King Alaric and 5 remaining guards. The king turned back to her. "You said the shadow thistle grows in the ruins. Finish your gathering. I will not have it said that I prevented a healer from treating her patients." Alara stared at him, uncertain whether this was kindness or simply practicality. Either way, returning to the ruins meant walking back past the dead rogues, now dragged into a pile and being doused with oil for burning. She steeled herself and moved forward, keeping her eyes averted from the bodies, focusing on the task. The shadow thistle still grew where she had seen it, untouched by the violence that had erupted nearby. She cut carefully, wrapping the stems in cloth, adding them to her gathering bag with the other herbs she had collected that morning. Behind her, she heard the whoosh of flames as the rogues burned. The smell of burning flesh filled the air, acrid and horrible. Alara worked faster, desperate to be away from this place, away from death and smoke and the king's 2 knowing eyes. She finished gathering and straightened, turning to find him watching her again. "You move well in the forest," he observed. "Quiet, confident. You know where to step and where not to step. My father was a trapper and guide. He taught me the mountains when I was young." "Was? He died 10 years ago." "I am sorry." The words were formal but seemed genuine. "It is hard to lose a parent, especially at a young age." Alara said nothing. Sympathy from the king felt dangerous, too personal, too much like being seen. She wanted only to be invisible again, to return to the safe anonymity of her veil and her silence. King Alaric gestured toward the forest path. "Come, we will return to your village and speak with your stepmother. She needs to know you will be occupied with crown business for the next few days." "Days?" The word escaped before Alara could stop it. "You said I would help you and then be returned. And you will be. But finding rogue camps in mountains this vast will not be accomplished in an afternoon. You will guide us, show us the places where someone might hide, the caves and hollows that do not appear on any map. In return, you will be protected by the crown and compensated for your time. This is not a punishment, Alara Whitcomb. This is service to your kingdom." It was also a nightmare, but Alara knew better than to say so. She simply nodded and began walking, following the path back toward Thornhollow with the King of Ravenfall at her side, and his soldiers trailing behind. The sun climbed higher as they walked, filtering through the trees in patterns of light and shadow. Alara kept to the shaded side of the path whenever possible, hyper-aware of where the sunlight fell, of where she was safe, and where the curse waited to twist her features into horror. The village came into view as they descended the final slope, its collection of stone cottages and wooden buildings huddled together as though for warmth against the mountain cold. Smoke rose from morning fires, and the sounds of daily life drifted up on the wind. A hammer striking an anvil, children's voices, the bleating of goats. Normal life, oblivious to the violence that had unfolded in the forest above, unaware that their king walked among them. That changed the moment they reached the first houses. A woman hanging laundry saw them first, her eyes widening as she took in the soldiers in their dark leathers, the weapons, the blood still staining some of their clothes. She dropped her basket and ran inside, calling out in alarm. Within minutes, people were emerging from doorways, clustering in the street, staring with expressions that ranged from fear to curiosity to careful neutrality. The arrival of King's soldiers was never good news in a place like Thornhollow. It meant trouble, questions, someone's life about to be upended. Alara walked slightly behind King Alaric, hyper-aware of the attention they were drawing, of the way her neighbors looked at her and then away, confusion and speculation clear on their faces. What had the veiled girl done? Why was she with the soldiers? Was she in trouble? Or was she somehow complicit in whatever had brought armed men to their village? She could feel their judgment like a weight pressing down on her shoulders, could hear the whispers starting even though no one spoke loudly enough for her to make out words. Morgana's cottage stood near the center of the village, slightly larger than most, with a garden carefully maintained and an herb-drying shed attached to one side. Alara's steps slowed as they approached, dread coiling in her stomach. Her stepmother would be furious. Alara had failed to return before the sun rose high, had failed to avoid attention, had brought the king's men to their door. Whatever punishment Morgana devised would be terrible, all the worse for needing to be delayed until they were alone. The door opened before they reached it. Morgana stood in the threshold, and as always, Alara felt the sharp contrast between what she was and what she appeared to be. To the villagers, to the world, Morgana Whitcomb was a handsome woman in her early 40s, her dark hair touched with gray, her face kind and wise. She dressed simply but well, in the manner of a respected tradeswoman, and she moved with a grace that suggested confidence and competence. No one looking at her would see darkness. No one would suspect what she truly was. But Alara saw. Alara had always seen. Behind the kind mask lived something cold and calculating, something that viewed other people as tools or obstacles, something that had cursed a grieving 12-year-old child and never once shown remorse. Morgana's eyes, when they fell on Alara, were empty of anything resembling maternal concern, were instead measuring and assessing, calculating the damage and planning the response. "Alara?" Morgana said, her voice warm with false worry. "Thank the goddess. I was beginning to fear something had happened to you. You were gone so long." Her gaze shifted to King Alaric, and Alara saw her stepmother's pupils dilate slightly, recognition and alarm flashing across her features before being ruthlessly suppressed. Morgana dropped into a respectful curtsy. "My lord, this is an unexpected honor. How may I serve you?" King Alaric inclined his head slightly, acknowledgement without warmth. "Morgana Whitcomb, your reputation precedes you. I am told you are the finest herbalist in the outer villages. You are too kind, my lord. I do what I can to serve my community. A noble calling." The king's tone was perfectly neutral, impossible to read. "Your stepdaughter has been of service to the crown this morning. She witnessed rogue wolves planning an attack on the king's supply line and helped lead my men to them. The traitors have been dealt with." Morgana's expression shifted through several emotions in quick succession. Surprise, concern, pride, all perfectly calculated to seem genuine. "Alara? Truly? I had no idea she had encountered such danger. Thank the goddess you were there to protect her, my lord." Indeed, she showed considerable presence of mind. However, her assistance is required further. These mountains hide more rogues than we initially believed, and your stepdaughter knows the terrain better than anyone. I am conscripting her into temporary service as a guide. She will accompany my men for the next few days while we locate and eliminate the remaining threats. The silence that followed stretched just a moment too long. Alara could see her stepmother's mind working behind her eyes, weighing options, calculating risks. To refuse a direct command from the king was unthinkable. But to allow Alara out of her control, away from the cottage and the curse's enforcement, was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with rogues. "Of course, my lord," Morgana said finally, her smile never wavering. "If Alara can serve her kingdom, I would not dream of preventing it, though I confess I worry for her safety. She is not strong, not accustomed to hardship, and she has certain vulnerabilities. She will be protected by my men. No harm will come to her while she is under crown service. I am grateful for your assurance, but I wonder if I might speak with her briefly, my lord. There are certain medications she takes, certain precautions necessary for her health. If I might have a moment to prepare supplies for her journey." It was skillfully done, a reasonable request wrapped in concern. King Alaric studied Morgana for a long moment, and Alara had the sudden sense that he saw more than her stepmother realized, that those pale gray eyes missed very little. But he nodded. "You may have a quarter hour. My men will wait here. Alara, go with your stepmother." Alara felt her throat tighten with fear. A quarter hour alone with Morgana. Time enough for 100 small cruelties. Time enough for her stepmother to ensure she understood exactly how much trouble she was in. She moved toward the cottage on legs that felt like wood, following Morgana inside, hearing the door close behind them with the finality of a trap snapping shut. The interior of the cottage was exactly as she had left it that morning. The main room with its workbenches covered in drying herbs and glass vials, the fireplace with its banked coals, the narrow stairs leading up to the sleeping rooms and down to the cellar. Everything familiar, everything perfectly arranged, everything holding secrets beneath its mundane surface. Morgana waited until they were in the back room, away from windows, before she moved. Her hand shot out and gripped Alara's arm, fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. When she spoke, her voice was low and venomous, all pretense of kindness stripped away. "What have you done, you stupid girl?" "Nothing. I was gathering herbs like always. The rogues were in the ruins. I overheard them by accident. The king's men arrived and killed them. I had no choice." "No choice." Morgana's laugh was bitter. "You had no choice but to involve yourself with the King of Ravenfall. You had no choice but to draw his attention to this village, to this household, to me. Do you have any idea what you have risked?" "I did nothing wrong. I was gathering the herbs you demanded. I could not have known—" Silence. The word cracked like a whip. Morgana's other hand came up, gripping Alara's face through the veil, forcing her to meet her stepmother's eyes. "You will go with the king's men. You will guide them through the forests. You will be the perfect, helpful little servant. And you will be very, very careful to keep your face covered at all times. Do you understand me?" "Yes. If the curse is discovered, if anyone sees what you truly are, you know what will happen. The curse becomes permanent, forever. And I will ensure that everyone knows you for the monster you have become. The king will reject you in horror. The soldiers will drive you away like the beast you are, and you will spend the rest of your miserable life hiding in caves and eating scraps." "Is that what you want?" "No." The word was barely a whisper. "Then be very careful, Alara. Be very, very careful." Morgana released her abruptly, turning away to one of the workbenches. She began gathering items with quick, efficient movements. A leather pack, dried meat, a water skin, bandages, small vials of medicine. These are legitimate supplies, food, basic medical supplies, nothing that would raise questions. You will take them and you will return in no more than 3 days. If you are not back by then, I will assume the worst and take appropriate measures. Alara did not ask what those measures might be. She simply accepted the pack, slinging it over her shoulder alongside her gathering bag. Her arm throbbed where Morgana had gripped it, and she knew there would be bruises blooming beneath her sleeve, dark purple reminders of her stepmother's control. Morgana moved closer again, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Remember what dwells in the cellar, Alara. Remember what I can do. Your father learned too late what happens to those who displease me. Do not make the same mistake." The words were a blade sliding between Alara's ribs, confirming what she had always suspected but never dared voice. Her father's death had not been natural. The fever that consumed him had been crafted, administered, controlled by the woman he had married in good faith, the woman he had trusted to help raise his daughter. Morgana had murdered him, and she stood here now, admitting it with complete confidence that Alara would never dare speak of it aloud. "I understand," Alara said, her voice hollow. "Good. Now go. The king is waiting, and we must not give him reason to become suspicious." They returned to the main room, where Morgana transformed back into the concerned stepmother, her face soft with worry, her movements gentle as she adjusted the pack on Alara's shoulders. "There now, child. You have food and water and medicines if you need them. Be careful, and do exactly as the king's men tell you. I will pray for your safe return." Alara nodded mutely and escaped outside, where King Alaric and his soldiers waited in the street. A small crowd had gathered at a respectful distance, villagers watching the scene with open curiosity. She could see the miller's wife whispering to her neighbor, saw old Willem leaning on his cane and shaking his head, saw the blacksmith's apprentice staring with wide eyes. This would be talked about for months, maybe years. The veiled girl who went into the mountains with the king. Stories would be invented, rumors would spread, and when she returned, assuming she returned, life in Thornhollow would be even more difficult than it had been before, if that was even possible. King Alaric looked her over briefly, noting the new pack. "Your stepmother has supplied you adequately?" "Yes, my lord." "Then we waste no more time. Captain Connor should have returned by now to the meeting point. We will join him and begin the search." They set out immediately, leaving the village behind with its watching eyes and whispered speculation. Alara walked in the middle of the group, surrounded by soldiers who moved with the easy confidence of men accustomed to danger. They spoke little, communicating mostly through gestures and brief words, and they seemed to accept her presence without question. She was the king's guide, therefore she was under the king's protection. Therefore she was to be treated with the same respect they would show any other asset valuable to their mission. King Alaric himself walked at the front, setting a pace that was brisk but not punishing. He seemed to know instinctively when to slow for difficult terrain, when to pause and let his men catch their breath, when to push forward without rest. It was the skill of someone who had led men through hard country many times before, who understood the limits of endurance and how to work within them. They rejoined Captain Connor and his men at midday, meeting at a clearing marked by 3 distinctive stones that formed a natural landmark. The captain reported finding 2 abandoned campsites, both recently used, both showing signs of multiple occupants. The rogues were not operating alone. There was organization here, planning, which suggested someone intelligent was coordinating them. "Show me," King Alaric commanded, and Connor led them through the forest to the first site. It was well hidden, tucked into a fold in the terrain where casual travelers would never notice, but clear paths had been worn through the undergrowth by repeated use. The fire pit was cold, but not old. No more than a day since the last fire burned there. Supplies had been left behind in the flight. Blankets, a dented pot, bones from recent meals. Alara stood at the edge of the camp while the soldiers searched through the abandoned materials. She had never been here before, had not known this place existed despite her familiarity with the mountains. These men had hidden themselves well, had chosen locations that avoided the paths she normally walked. But looking at the terrain now, she could see the logic of their choices. Water nearby, shelter from wind, visibility of the approaches. "There are more sites," she said quietly, surprised by her own voice. "If they chose this location for these reasons, there are other places in these mountains with similar advantages. I can think of at least 3, perhaps more." King Alaric turned to look at her. "Show us." Over the next hours, Alara led them through the forests, pointing out locations where rogues might camp, where water and shelter and strategic position converged. They found 2 more abandoned sites, evidence of a network larger than anyone had suspected. At each location, King Alaric studied the remains with intense focus, reading the story the discarded items told. How many men, how long they stayed, what direction they traveled. The sun was beginning to lower toward the western peaks when they reached the 4th site, and this one was different. The fire pit here was still warm, the ashes holding heat from a fire that had burned that very morning. Food had been left mid-preparation, bowls of half-mixed stew sitting abandoned. And there, on a flat stone, lay a map. King Alaric picked it up carefully, his expression darkening as he studied it. This shows the entire northern territory. Supply routes, garrison locations, patrol schedules. He looked at his men, his voice hard. This is not the work of common rogues stealing to survive. This is military intelligence. Someone inside the king's forces is feeding information to these traitors. The words fell like stones into still water, their implications spreading outward in devastating circles. If there was a traitor in the garrisons, if someone sworn to serve the crown was actively working against it, then the problem was far larger than a few scattered rogues. This was conspiracy, organized and calculated, and the danger it represented could not be measured in simple terms. "We need to move quickly," Captain Connor said. "If they know we are hunting them, they already know." King Alaric's tone was grim. "They abandoned this camp this morning, left everything behind to run. Someone warned them. Someone knew we were coming." His eyes swept over his men, and Alara could see him doing the mental calculation, wondering if the traitor was among his own soldiers, if the enemy was already inside his circle. A sound split the air, high and piercing. A horn, blown from somewhere deeper in the forest, its call echoing between the mountains. It was answered by another horn and then another, coming from different directions. Signals. The rogues were coordinating, calling to each other, and the soldiers were caught in the middle. "Defensive positions," King Alaric commanded, his voice cutting through the sudden tension. "Circle formation. Protect the guide." The soldiers moved instantly, forming a ring with Alara at the center, weapons drawn, every sense alert. The forest around them seemed suddenly alive with hidden threats, every shadow potentially concealing an enemy. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized what was happening. They were surrounded. The rogues had not run. They had lured them into a trap. The attack came from multiple directions at once. Rogues burst from the trees, more than a dozen, wild-eyed and snarling, weapons raised. They moved with the enhanced speed and strength of their wolf blood, hitting the defensive circle like a wave against rock. Steel rang against steel. Men shouted. Blood sprayed hot across the cold air. Alara dropped to the ground, making herself small, trying to stay out of the way of the combat raging above her. A rogue broke through the circle, leaping over a fallen soldier, his eyes fixing on her with predatory intent. She was the weak point, the vulnerable human who could not fight back, and he knew it. He rushed toward her, knife raised, and Alara rolled desperately away, her hand closing on a rock without conscious thought. The rogue was almost on her when something massive and dark crashed into him from the side. King Alaric, moving with speed that should not have been possible, caught the rogue in mid-leap and drove him into the ground with bone-breaking force. The fight was over in seconds, brutal and efficient, and the rogue lay still. "Stay down," the king commanded, his voice rough, and then he was moving again, wading back into the combat with his sword singing death. Alara watched from the ground as he fought, and she understood in that moment that everything she had heard about the Alpha King was undersold. He was not just a ruler, he was a warrior in his prime, trained and deadly, and his enemies fell before him like wheat before a scythe. The battle was fierce but brief. The rogues had numbers, but the soldiers had discipline and better weapons, and they had their king fighting alongside them. One by one, the attackers fell, until the last few broke and ran, disappearing into the forest like smoke on wind. King Alaric let them go, not pursuing, his priority clearly his men and his mission. "Status," he called, and the soldiers reported in. 2 wounded, 1 seriously, but none dead. Remarkable considering the violence of the attack. Captain Connor was already tending to the injured, his hands steady as he bound wounds and distributed medicine from the field kit. King Alaric turned to Alara, who was still on the ground where he had ordered her. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. She was alive, miraculously alive, and she still had no idea how. The rogue who had come for her would have killed her without question, would have slit her throat and moved on to the next target. But the king had saved her, had prioritized her protection over his own safety, and she did not understand why. He offered her his hand, pulling her to her feet with easy strength. His eyes studied her face, or what he could see of it behind the veil, and something flickered in his expression that she could not identify. "You are braver than you appear," he said quietly. "Another woman would be hysterical after what you have witnessed today." "I am too frightened to be hysterical," Alara replied honestly, "and hysterics have never helped anyone survive anything." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "True enough. Come. We need to move from this position before they regroup and return with greater numbers." They moved quickly through the darkening forest, carrying the wounded soldier between them on a makeshift stretcher. Night was falling fast in the mountains, and with it came the cold, sharp, and unforgiving. King Alaric led them to a defensible position, a rocky outcropping that provided shelter on 3 sides and clear visibility of the approaches. They could not return to the village tonight, not with wounded men and rogues potentially tracking them. They would need to make camp and wait for dawn. The soldiers worked with quiet efficiency, setting up a perimeter, building a small fire shielded by stones to minimize its visibility, tending to their injured comrades. Alara found herself relegated to the edge of the activity, uncertain of her role, unwilling to intrude where her help might not be wanted. She watched as Captain Connor cleaned and stitched the worst wound, his hands steady despite the poor light, and she saw the injured soldier bite down on leather to keep from crying out. "You have medical knowledge." King Alaric's voice came from beside her, startling her. She had not heard him approach. "Your stepmother trained you." "Some basic things. I am better with plants than with people. Nevertheless, you could be useful." Connor has his hands full, and we have bandages that need changing. It was not quite an order, but neither was it a suggestion. Alara nodded and moved to help, grateful for something to do, some way to be valuable beyond simply existing as a potential liability. She worked alongside the soldiers, cleaning minor wounds, applying salves from her gathering bag, wrapping bandages with practiced efficiency. The men accepted her help with quiet gratitude, too tired and sore to question her presence. One young soldier, barely old enough to grow a beard, smiled at her despite his pain. "Thank you, miss. Your hands are gentler than the captain's." "The captain's hands keep you alive," Alara replied. "Gentleness is a luxury for those who are not bleeding." The soldier laughed, then winced. "Fair point. Still, I am grateful." As the night deepened, the camp settled into an uneasy watchfulness. Guards were posted in shifts, the fire was kept low, and everyone remaining awake spoke in whispers. Alara sat with her back against stone, her cloak wrapped tight against the cold, and tried not to think about what would happen tomorrow. They would continue hunting rogues. More violence would follow, and eventually, she would need to return to Thornhollow and face Morgana's wrath for whatever her stepmother imagined she had done wrong during this forced service. King Alaric sat nearby, studying the map they had recovered, his expression thoughtful in the firelight. After a long silence, he spoke without looking up. "You are afraid of your stepmother." It was not a question. Alara considered lying, considered denying it, but something about the directness of his observation made deception seem pointless. "Yes? Why?" "She is not kind to those who disappoint her." "Has she hurt you?" Now he did look up, his pale eyes finding her in the darkness. "Physically, I mean. Beyond ordinary discipline." The question was dangerous. Answering truthfully would invite more questions, would open doors that needed to remain closed, but lying to the king seemed equally unwise. Alara chose her words carefully. "My stepmother believes in firm correction. She is not cruel, merely exacting in her standards. That is an evasion, not an answer. It is the answer I can give, my lord." He studied her for a long moment, then returned his attention to the map. "You defend her even while fearing her. That is either loyalty or terror." "I suspect the latter." Alara said nothing. There was nothing safe to say. "The map shows more than supply routes," King Alaric continued, his tone shifting to business. "It shows weak points in our defenses, locations where patrols can be avoided, timing of guard changes. This information could only come from someone with access to military planning, someone inside the northern garrison, possibly someone of rank." "You think the traitor is one of your own officers?" "I think the traitor is someone I have trusted, which makes this situation far more dangerous than a simple rogue problem. If I cannot trust my own command structure, then every order I give, every plan I make, could be compromised." He rolled the map carefully, frustration evident in his movements. "I came to these mountains expecting to handle a minor border incursion. Instead, I find organized conspiracy reaching into the heart of my military. What will you do?" "What I must. Root out the traitor, eliminate the rogues, and ensure this never happens again. But it will require care. If I act too openly, the conspirators will go underground, disappear, and resurface later. I need to draw them out, make them reveal themselves. Using what is bait?" He smiled then, sharp and cold. "Myself, if necessary. Power attracts challenge. There are always those who believe they could rule better, who resent the hierarchy, who dream of tearing down what exists and building something new from the ruins. This is not the first conspiracy I have faced, and it will not be the last. The casualness with which he spoke of people wanting him dead was chilling. Alara wondered what it was like to live with that knowledge constantly, to know that power and position made you a target, that every person who smiled at you might be calculating how to kill you. It seemed like a lonelier existence than even her own. "You asked earlier why I wear the veil," she said quietly, surprising herself. "You asked and I gave you an insufficient answer." Yes. His attention focused on her completely, that unnerving intensity that made her feel transparent. "I did. The truth is that I was cursed 10 years ago. The curse affects my appearance in direct light, makes me into something—" She struggled for words. "Something I would rather others not see. The veil protects me from questions, from horror, from being driven away. Who cursed you?" The question she had dreaded, the one she could not answer truthfully without breaking the rules Morgana had set, without risking everything. "I do not know. It happened when I was 12, the night my father died. I woke the next morning and the curse was there, settled into my skin like a brand." It was not quite a lie. She truly did not know all the specifics of what Morgana had done, what ritual she had performed, what price had been paid. But it was not quite truth either, and she could see in King Alaric's eyes that he knew it. "An enemy of your father's, perhaps," he suggested, giving her an escape. "Someone who blamed him for something and chose to take revenge on his child. Perhaps. I was too young to understand the politics of such things. And your stepmother could not break the curse. She tried. She is skilled, but some magics are beyond even her abilities." The lies came more easily now, layering over each other, building a story that protected Morgana even as it enslaved Alara. She hated herself for it, but she had no choice. The alternative was permanent transformation, was living forever as the monster the curse made her. King Alaric was silent for a time, his expression unreadable. Then he said something that shocked her. "I am sorry that happened to you. No child should suffer for the actions of adults, should not be made to carry curses they did nothing to earn." The sympathy in his voice was genuine, and it cut deeper than any of Morgana's cruelties. Alara had lived so long without kindness that she barely knew how to receive it, how to accept that someone might care about her pain without ulterior motive. She felt tears threatening behind her eyes and forced them back ruthlessly. Crying would achieve nothing except possibly making the veil damp, which would make it transparent, which would reveal the curse. She could not afford weakness. "Thank you, my lord," she managed. "You are kind to say so." "I am not kind. I am honest. There is a difference." He stood, stretching muscles tight from the day's fighting. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be difficult, and you need your strength. What about you? I will take the second watch. Sleep, Alara Whitcomb. You are under my protection, and I do not fail in my duties." She wanted to say that he had already saved her life twice that day, that she understood the weight of the debt she owed him, that she was grateful beyond words for his protection, even though she did not understand why he offered it. But the words tangled in her throat, and instead she simply nodded and settled herself more comfortably against the stone, pulling her cloak tight and closing her eyes. Sleep came surprisingly easily despite everything. Exhaustion, overwhelming fear. She dreamed of forests burning, of running through flames while something pursued her, of her veil catching fire and burning away to reveal the horror beneath. She woke gasping in the deep hours of night to find the camp quiet, the fire burned down to coals, and King Alaric sitting watch with his sword across his knees, staring out into the darkness as though he could see things invisible to human eyes. Perhaps he could. He was the Alpha King, after all, possessed of power and senses far beyond mortal limits. She had seen him fight, seen the speed and strength that marked him as something more than human. And yet he had shown her kindness, had treated her with a respect she had never known from anyone except her long-dead father. It was confusing and dangerous and made her want things she had no right to want. She closed her eyes and forced herself back to sleep, and this time she dreamed of nothing. Dawn came cold and gray, mist rising from the valley below like the breath of giants. The soldiers rose stiffly, tended to morning necessities, checked weapons and wounds, and prepared to move out. The injured soldier who had been worst hurt was showing signs of fever, his face flushed and his breathing shallow. Captain Connor looked grim as he changed the bandages. "He needs real treatment, my lord. A healer with access to proper medicines. If infection sets in..." "I know." King Alaric's voice was hard. "We are 2 hours from the northern garrison if we push hard. He can make it that far." "My lord, if I may," Alara heard herself saying, "I have medicines in my pack that could help. Willow bark for the fever, golden seal for infection. It is not a cure, but it might buy him time." The captain looked at her with surprise and calculation. "You carry those? In your gathering bag?" "Always. My stepmother insisted I be prepared for emergencies." Which was true, though Morgana's definition of emergency typically involved maintaining the facade of being a benevolent healer, not actually saving lives. "Do it," King Alaric ordered. "Anything that helps is worth trying." Alara knelt beside the injured soldier and went to work, mixing medicines with practiced hands, administering them carefully. The man was barely conscious, his eyes glazed with pain and fever, but he swallowed what she gave him without resistance. She wished she had more, wished she had the full resources of Morgana's workshop. But field medicine was always about working with insufficient supplies. As she worked, she became aware of someone watching her with unusual intensity. She glanced up to find King Alaric standing nearby, his expression thoughtful. When their eyes met, he spoke quietly, almost to himself. "You have a gentle touch, natural healing instinct. These are not skills that come from simple training. My father used to say I had a gift for it, that I could calm frightened animals, that plants grew better where I walked." She smiled sadly behind her veil. "He believed in such things. Magic in the blood, he called it, though I never saw evidence of any true power. Perhaps you never looked in the right place." Before she could ask what he meant, one of the scouts came running back into camp, his face urgent. "My lord, there is activity in the valley." A large group moving south along the trade road. "They fly no banners." King Alaric was moving before the scout finished speaking. "How many?" "At least 20, possibly more. They are moving fast, trying to reach the pass before full daylight." "The supply wagons." King Alaric's voice was steel. "They are planning to ambush the convoy while we are stuck in the mountains. How far to the trade road from here?" "An hour if we run, my lord." "But with the wounded?" "We leave the wounded here with 2 guards. The rest of us move now." "Alara, can you guide us to the road by the fastest route?" Alara thought quickly, visualizing the terrain, the paths she knew. "Yes, there is a way down through the ravines, steep but passable. It will save us 15 minutes. Then lead. Captain, select your 2 best men to stay with the injured. Everyone else, weapons ready. We go at combat speed." The camp dissolved into controlled chaos. Alara found herself at the front of a group of running soldiers, leading them down through treacherous terrain at a pace that made her heart hammer and her lungs burn. The ravine path was barely a path at all, more a series of descents and leaps that required perfect footing and no hesitation. She had walked it before, but never at speed, never with lives depending on her not making a mistake. Behind her, the soldiers followed with the sure-footedness of men accustomed to difficult terrain, trusting her guidance even though they had no reason to, except that their king commanded it. King Alaric ran beside her, matching her pace, ready to catch her if she fell. The attention would have been flattering under other circumstances. Now it simply added pressure to an already terrifying situation. They reached the trade road with minutes to spare, bursting from the tree line just as the rogues emerged from the opposite side. The supply wagon was caught in the middle, its guards drawing weapons, the driver trying to turn the horses. And then violence erupted for the second time in as many days. King Alaric hit the rogue line like a thrown hammer, scattering them, his sword cutting through the first man before anyone could react. His soldiers followed, crashing into the ambush with disciplined fury. The rogues had expected an easy target, poorly guarded supplies ripe for plunder. Instead, they found themselves facing the Alpha King himself, and their formation collapsed into chaos. Alara pressed herself against a boulder at the road's edge, staying out of the combat, watching as men fought and died around the wagon. The driver was trying to control the panicked horses. The guards were fighting back to back, and King Alaric was everywhere at once, his blades singing a song of death that never seemed to end. One of the rogues broke from the fight, sprinting toward the wagon, clearly trying to cut the traces and steal the horses. Alara saw him coming, saw that the guards were engaged elsewhere, saw that no one was in position to stop him. Without thinking, she grabbed a rock from the roadside and threw it with all her strength. Her aim was terrible, but luck was on her side. The rock struck the rogue's shoulder, throwing off his balance just as he reached for the traces. He stumbled, looked around to identify the attacker, and in that moment of distraction, one of the guards drove a spear through his chest. The rogue went down hard, blood spreading across the dirt road. The guard nodded at Alara, acknowledgement and thanks, then turned back to the fight. And Alara stood there with her hands shaking, realizing she had just helped kill a man, that her action had directly led to someone's death, and she did not know how to feel about that. The battle ended quickly once the rogues realized they were facing trained soldiers rather than helpless victims. Those who could fled into the forest. Those who could not were cut down without mercy. King Alaric let them run this time, his priority the safety of the supply wagon and its valuable cargo. "Secure the supplies," he ordered. "Check for damage. Ensure the guards are unharmed." He moved to the wagon, speaking quietly with the surviving guards, assessing the situation. Then he turned to Alara, his expression unreadable. "You threw a rock at an armed rogue?" "Yes, my lord. I am sorry. I did not think." "You thought perfectly. You saw a threat to the mission, identified a solution within your capabilities, and acted decisively. That is exactly what a good soldier does." He studied her for a moment, and something like respect flickered in his eyes. "You are full of surprises, Alara Whitcomb. I merely did what needed doing. Most people cannot say the same. They freeze when violence comes. You have now twice acted with courage under fire. That is worth noting." Alara did not know how to respond to that, so she said nothing. The wagon was intact, the supplies secured, and the immediate threat eliminated. But she could see on King Alaric's face that he was thinking past the immediate problem, calculating implications and consequences. "This was coordinated," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. They knew the wagon would be here, at this time, on this road. They knew it would be lightly guarded. "That information came from inside my command structure, which means the traitor is still feeding intelligence to the rogues. We eliminated some of their forces, but we have not cut off their source." Captain Connor approached, wiping blood from his sword. "My lord, we should return to the garrison. Get the supplies secured, treat the wounded, and plan our next move from a defensible position." "Agreed. How far to the garrison?" 3 hours at normal pace, my lord. Less if we push." "We push. I want walls around us before nightfall." King Alaric looked at Alara. "You have more than earned your release from service. I will have my men escort you back to your village with my thanks and my promise of appropriate compensation for your help." The words should have been relief. She could return to Thornhollow to familiar misery, to the known dangers of Morgana's control. But instead, Alara felt something that might have been disappointment, a strange reluctance to leave this group of soldiers, this man who treated her like she mattered. It made no sense. She should be desperate to escape, yet here she stood, hesitating, and she did not understand why. "If I may, my lord," she said slowly, "the medicines I gave your injured soldier will need to be administered again in 6 hours. And there are preparations I could make at the garrison that would aid his recovery. If you would permit me to accompany you there, I could ensure his treatment continues properly before I return home." It was a flimsy excuse, and they both knew it. Any military healer could follow simple instructions for administering medicine. But King Alaric did not challenge her reasoning. Instead, he simply nodded. "Very well, you will come to the garrison, but understand that we will be conducting an investigation there, rooting out traitors and conspirators. The situation may become dangerous. You would be safer at home." Home. The word was almost funny. Thornhollow had never been home, not truly. Just a place where she existed, where she hid, where she slowly disappeared. but she nodded acceptance of his warning and fell into line with the soldiers as they began the march toward the northern garrison. The route took them along the trade road for an hour, then branched onto a military road that climbed toward the peaks. The garrison came into view as they rounded a final bend, a fortress of gray stone clinging to the mountainside, walls 30 feet high, towers at each corner, and the king's banner flying above the gate. It was built to withstand siege, to control the passes, to project power across the northern territories. And somewhere inside those walls was a traitor working to undermine everything it represented. The garrison gates opened at their approach, soldiers on the walls recognizing their king and calling out the alert. Within minutes, the courtyard was filled with activity as men rushed to attend to the wounded, secure the supplies, and report on the state of the fortress. Alara found herself swept along in the organized chaos, following Captain Connor as he carried the injured soldier toward the infirmary. The garrison healer was a grizzled man in his 50s who took one look at his patient and immediately began barking orders. Alara assisted as best she could, measuring out the medicines she had brought, explaining what she had already administered and what needed to follow. The healer listened with grudging respect, asked intelligent questions, and eventually nodded acceptance of her recommendations. "You know your work," he said bluntly. "Your stepmother trained you well. Morgana Whitcomb has a reputation even here. Some call her the finest herbalist in the Northern Territories. She is very skilled." Alara agreed neutrally, unwilling to say more. The healer seemed to sense her reticence and did not push, turning his attention back to his patient. Alara slipped out of the infirmary once her presence was no longer needed, finding herself alone in a corridor of gray stone, uncertain where to go or what to do. She had never been inside a military fortress before, had never seen this much organization and discipline in one place. Soldiers moved through the halls with purpose, servants carried supplies, and everywhere there was the sense of a machine functioning exactly as designed. She found a quiet corner near a window and sat on the stone bench there, looking out over the mountains. The sun was lowering toward the western peaks, painting the snow-covered slopes in shades of gold and rose. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, the kind of beauty that killed those who did not respect it. Like everything else in Ravenfall, "You should eat." King Alaric's voice came from behind her, startling her for the second time that day. "You have had nothing since this morning, and you must be hungry." Alara turned to find him standing in the corridor, still in his blood-stained traveling clothes, looking tired but alert. "I am fine, my lord. Do not trouble yourself on my account." "It is no trouble. Come. The officers' mess will have food, and you have earned the right to eat without standing in line with common soldiers." He gestured for her to follow, and she did, lacking any better option. The officers' mess was a long room with tables and benches, a fire burning in the hearth at one end. Only a few people were present at this hour, eating quietly, and they looked up with curiosity as King Alaric entered with a veiled woman at his side. He ignored their stares, leading Alara to a table near the fire and signaling for food. A servant brought bread, cheese, roasted meat, and ale. Simple fare, but fresh and well prepared, better than Alara typically ate. She lifted her veil just enough to eat, careful to keep her face shadowed, hyper-aware of the light from the fire and the windows. The curse stirred beneath her skin, a constant reminder of what she could not allow anyone to see. King Alaric ate in silence for several minutes, then spoke quietly. "I am arranging for a full investigation of the garrison. Every officer will be questioned, their quarters searched, their correspondence examined. Someone here is feeding information to the rogues, and I will find them. You believe they are still here? That they have not fled? If they had fled, it would mark them as guilty. No, the traitor is still here, still playing their role, still trying to maintain their cover. They do not yet know how much I have learned." He paused, his eyes distant. "The difficult part will be determining who can be trusted to conduct the investigation. I cannot assign this task to someone who might themselves be compromised. Then who will you trust? Myself, Captain Connor, who has served with me for 10 years and whose loyalty is beyond question, and perhaps one or two others I have known since childhood." He looked at her directly. I do not make a habit of trusting easily, Alara Whitcomb. Trust is a luxury kings cannot afford. Then you live a lonely life, my lord. All lives at the top are lonely. Power isolates. It must, or it becomes vulnerable. He set down his ale. But you understand isolation, do you not? You live behind a veil, keeping the world at distance, allowing no one close enough to truly see you. The observation cut too close to truths she did not want to examine. We all protect ourselves in our own ways. Indeed we do. The question is whether the protection is worth the cost. He stood, the meal finished. I have arranged a room for you in the guest quarters. You will stay here tonight, and tomorrow my men will escort you back to Thornhollow with my gratitude and appropriate payment for your services. My lord, Alara hesitated, uncertain what she wanted to say. Thank you seemed inadequate. I do not want to leave seemed dangerous. In the end, she settled for simple honesty. You have been kind to me, kinder than I expected or deserved. I am grateful. You deserved kindness simply by being human and in need of it. That is not a high bar to clear? He smiled slightly, and it transformed his face, made him seem younger and less burdened. Sleep well, Alara. You are safe within these walls. He left her then, disappearing into the fortress on whatever business occupied the Alpha King. Alara sat alone by the fire, finishing her meal, wondering at the strange turns her life had taken in the past 2 days. She had gone from invisible servant to royal guide, had fought rogues and helped save supply wagons, had earned the respect of soldiers and the protection of the king himself. It felt like a story someone else was living, not her own life at all. A servant showed her to the guest quarters eventually, a small but clean room with a real bed, a wash basin, and a window overlooking the courtyard. Luxury compared to her stone floor at home. Alara removed her veil in the privacy of the room, washed her face carefully in the shadowed corner away from the window, and allowed herself to see her real features in the small mirror on the wall. She looked tired, dark circles under her gray eyes, her skin pale from lack of sun. But she looked human, normal, herself. The curse only manifested in direct light, and the room's shadows kept her safe. She wondered what it would be like to live without this constant fear, to walk in sunlight without terror, to let people see her face without horror. It was a fantasy so distant she could barely imagine it. Sleep came slowly that night, her mind replaying the violence she had witnessed, the strange kindness the king had shown her, the dangerous path she was walking between Morgana's control and a world she barely understood. She dreamed of fire again, but this time she was not running. This time she stood in the flames and burned without dying, transformed but not destroyed. She woke to shouting. The sound came from the courtyard below her window. Angry voices raised an accusation. Alara rushed to look out and saw soldiers gathering in the pre-dawn darkness, torches burning, weapons drawn. At the center of the commotion stood King Alaric, fully armed, his face terrible in its fury. And kneeling before him in chains was one of his officers, a man Alara recognized as having been present during the hunt through the mountains. Traitor. King Alaric's voice carried clearly in the cold air. You sold intelligence to rogues. You betrayed your oath, your king, and your brothers in arms. What do you have to say in your defense? Nothing, my lord. The chained officer's voice was steady despite his situation. I am caught. I will not insult you with lies or excuses. Then you will hang at dawn. Take him to the cells. Guards dragged the man away as the gathered soldiers dispersed, muttering among themselves. Alara stood at her window, shocked by the speed of the revelation. King Alaric had found his traitor in less than a day, had rooted out the conspiracy, had brought justice down with terrible swiftness. This was what it meant to be king, to have the power to investigate, judge, and execute all in one motion. She was still standing at the window when someone knocked on her door. She grabbed her veil, wrapping it quickly, then opened the door to find Captain Connor standing in the corridor. Miss Whitcomb, the king requests your presence in his study. Immediately, if you please. Alara's heart sank. This could not be good news. She followed the captain through the fortress to a tower room where King Alaric stood studying a table covered in papers and maps. He looked up as she entered, his expression grim. "Close the door," he commanded. Connor obeyed and took up a position beside it, effectively blocking the exit. Alara felt panic rising in her throat. This felt like an interrogation, like she was about to be accused of something. King Alaric gestured to the papers on the table. The traitor officer kept detailed records of his communications with the rogues. Very thorough, very incriminating. He documented everything, perhaps as insurance, perhaps simply out of habit. Among his notes, I found something interesting. He lifted a single page, holding it so she could see the handwriting. He mentions a contact in Thorn Hollow, someone who supplied him with information about the mountains, about which paths travelers used, where people could be ambushed without witnesses. Does that sound familiar? Alara's mouth went dry. My lord, I do not understand. The contact is described as a healer, a woman with extensive knowledge of herbs and, according to these notes, certain other skills that go beyond ordinary medicine. The officer does not name this contact directly, but he describes her location: a cottage near the center of the village, with an herb garden and a drying shed. King Alaric set the paper down, his eyes boring into her. Your stepmother's cottage, Alara. The room spun. Alara reached out to steady herself against the table, her mind racing. Morgana involved with the rogues. Morgana providing intelligence that led to attacks on the king's supplies. Morgana committing treason on a scale that would bring the full weight of royal justice down on her and anyone associated with her, including her stepdaughter. No, Alara whispered. That is impossible. She would not what? Betray her king for profit? According to these records, she has been paid handsomely for her information. Enough gold to live comfortably for years. King Alaric's voice was hard. The question I must now answer is whether you were complicit in her treason. Whether your presence on the mountain, your convenient discovery of the rogues, your ready cooperation was all a performance designed to infiltrate my guard and gather more intelligence. No! The word burst from her with desperate force. I knew nothing of this. I swear on my father's grave I had no knowledge of any conspiracy. She told me nothing. She trusted me with nothing. I am her servant, not her confidant. Then why did she insist you take medicines with you when you left with me? Why did she seem so concerned about your health and your vulnerabilities? King Alaric moved closer, and Alara saw the calculation in his eyes. What if those medicines were not for my injured soldier at all? What if they were meant for me? The implication hit her like a physical blow. Poison. Morgana had given her poison disguised as medicine, had sent her into the field with the king expecting her to have opportunities to administer it. The perfect assassination, committed by someone who would seem innocent, who could not possibly have known what she carried. Alara had been made a weapon without her knowledge, and she had nearly used it. The golden seal, she said, horror flooding through her. And the willow bark. You think they were poisoned. I think your stepmother is capable of anything, including sacrificing you to achieve her aims. Captain, send word to the infirmary. Have the healer check the soldier who received medicine from Miss Whitcomb's supplies. If he shows any signs of poisoning, we will know. Connor left immediately, and Alara stood alone with the king, her mind fragmenting under the weight of revelation. Everything Morgana had done, every instruction she had given, had been calculated toward this moment. The herbs Alara gathered were not for healing but for death. The curse was not just punishment but control, ensuring Alara could never speak against her, never reveal the truth. And now Alara herself stood accused of treason, complicit in conspiracy whether she had known it or not. I did not know, she repeated, her voice breaking. Please, my lord, I am not my stepmother. I have no love for her, no loyalty beyond what fear compels. If there is poison in those medicines, I swear I did not know it was there. King Alaric studied her in silence, his face unreadable. Then he spoke quietly. Remove your veil. The command struck like lightning. Alara took a step back, shaking her head. No, please, anything but that. Remove it. Now. I need to see your face. Need to see if you are lying to me. You do not understand. I cannot. The curse? I know about curses, Alara. I know about dark magic and the prices it demands. Whatever your stepmother did to you, whatever you fear I will see, it cannot be worse than being executed for treason. Remove the veil, or I will have my guards do it for you. There was no escape, no way to refuse. The choice was between revealing the curse and being torn apart by guards, and at least one of those options allowed her some dignity. With shaking hands, Alara reached up and unwound the layers of gauze that had protected her for 10 years. The morning sun was streaming through the study window, bright and merciless. She felt the curse activate immediately, that horrible crawling sensation as her features twisted and reformed. She forced herself to look at King Alaric, to see the horror and disgust that would appear on his face, the revulsion that every person would show when confronted with what she truly was. But his expression did not change. He looked at her carefully, his eyes moving over her face, and what she saw in his gaze was not horror, but confusion. "I see nothing wrong with you." "What?" The word came out strangled. "Your face is unchanged. You appear exactly as I would expect a young woman who has spent days in the mountains to appear. Tired, perhaps. Frightened, certainly. But there is no curse visible to me. That is impossible. I can feel it. The sunlight triggers it, always has. You must see... I see a woman who has been told she is cursed and has believed it for 10 years. But I am the Alpha King, Alara. I can sense magic, can smell it on the air like smoke. And there is no active curse on you. There is only the memory of one, the psychological scar it left behind." Alara's legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees on the stone floor, her mind unable to process what he was saying. No curse, no transformation. 10 years of hiding, 10 years of fear, 10 years of believing she was a monster, and it had been a lie. The curse had been broken, or had never worked as Morgana claimed, or had been entirely psychological from the start. She did not know which, and in that moment, she did not care. The door burst open and Captain Connor rushed in, his face urgent. "My lord, the healer reports the soldier is recovering well. No signs of poisoning. The medicines Miss Whitcomb administered were exactly what she claimed they were." King Alaric nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving Alara. "Then she is innocent of conspiracy. Prepare a detachment of men, Captain. We ride for Thornhollow within the hour. Morgana Whitcomb will answer for her crimes." Connor left to carry out the orders. Alara remained on the floor, her unveiled face turned toward the sunlight, tears streaming down her cheeks. Free. After 10 years of prison, she was free. The curse that had defined her entire adult life was gone, and she had no idea what to do with that freedom. King Alaric crouched beside her, his voice gentle. "She lied to you. She used fear to control you, to keep you silent and obedient. But you are not cursed, Alara. You never were. You are simply yourself, and that is enough." "I do not know how to be simply myself," Alara whispered. "I have been hiding for so long. I have forgotten what it is to exist without fear." "Then you will learn. It will take time, but you will learn." He stood, offering her his hand. "Come. We have a witch to arrest, and I want you present when we do. You deserve to see justice done." Alara took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. For the first time in a decade, she stood in full sunlight with her face bare and felt no horror, no transformation, no curse. Just the warmth of the sun on her skin and the terrifying, exhilarating possibility of a different life. The ride to Thornhollow took less time than Alara expected, the soldiers moving at speed with their king at their head. She rode beside him, her veil discarded, her face exposed to the world, and every minute was an act of courage. The soldiers who glanced at her showed no disgust, no horror. They simply saw her, and that was somehow more frightening than being hidden. They arrived in the village to find it peaceful, people going about their daily business, unaware of the storm about to break. King Alaric led his men directly to Morgana's cottage, surrounding it before announcing their presence. Then he knocked on the door with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed immediately. Morgana opened it with her usual gracious smile, which froze when she saw Alara standing unveiled beside the king. Her eyes went wide, shock and fury warring across her face before she managed to suppress both. "My lord, Elara, what a surprise. Please, come in." "No need." King Alaric's voice was cold. "Morgana Whitcomb, you are under arrest for conspiracy against the crown, providing aid to enemies of the kingdom, and attempting to use your stepdaughter as an unwitting weapon in a plot to assassinate the king. You will come with me to stand trial, and if found guilty, you will hang." The mask dropped completely. Morgana's face twisted with hate as she looked at Elara. "You told him. You revealed everything. You broke the curse, and now you think you are safe. But you will never be safe from me. Never. The curse was always a lie," Elara said quietly. "You used my fear to control me, but you had no real power over me. Not anymore." Morgana lunged, her hand going to a knife at her belt, murder in her eyes. But King Alaric was faster, catching her wrist and twisting until the weapon fell. Guards rushed forward, binding her hands, dragging her away from the cottage while she screamed threats and curses that echoed through the village. Captain Connor entered the cottage with several men, descending to the cellar to document the evidence of dark magic practiced there. They emerged hours later with books, ingredients, and tools that would ensure Morgana's conviction. The villagers gathered in the street, watching in shock as their respected healer was revealed as a traitor and a witch. Elara stood apart from the crowd, watching her stepmother being loaded into a wagon bound for the capital and trial. She felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory, only emptiness where fear had lived for so long, and uncertainty about what came next. King Alaric approached, his expression thoughtful. "You have nowhere to go now. Your stepmother's property will be seized by the crown, her crimes too great to allow any inheritance. You cannot return to this cottage." "I know." Elara looked at the building that had been her prison for 10 years. "I do not want to return. I never want to see it again." "Then come with me, to the capital. I will ensure you have lodging and employment that you are cared for. You have earned that much through your service." It was a generous offer, more than generous. A life in the capital, away from Thornhollow and its memories, away from everything that had hurt her. She should accept immediately, should thank him and agree without question. But something made her hesitate, made her look at him carefully, and ask the question that had been growing in her mind for days. "Why? Why do you care what happens to me? I am nobody, a servant girl from a remote village. You are the king. Why does my fate matter to you?" He was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only she could hear. "Because from the moment I caught your scent in the forest, something in me recognized something in you. The wolf knows its mate, even when the human mind does not yet understand. You are not cursed, Elara Whitcomb, but I may be, because I cannot imagine letting you walk away." The confession hung in the air between them, impossible and terrifying, and somehow inevitable. Elara stared at him, searching his face for deception and finding only honesty. The Alpha King, the most powerful man in Ravenfall, was claiming her as his mate. It should have been absurd. It should have been impossible. But standing there in the sunlight with her face bare for the first time in a decade, it felt like the only true thing in a world built on lies. "I do not know how to be anyone's mate," she said finally. "I barely know how to be myself. Then we will figure it out together, if you are willing." Elara thought of everything she was leaving behind. The cottage, the village, the life of invisible servitude. She thought of everything that lay ahead. Uncertainty, danger, a world she barely understood. And she thought of this man who had saved her life, freed her from a curse, and offered her a future she had never dared imagine. "I am willing," she whispered. King Alaric smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face, and took her hand in his. "Then let us go home." They rode toward the capital together as the sun climbed higher, Elara Whitcomb leaving behind the veiled ghost she had been, and stepping into a future bright with possibility and terrifying with hope. She did not know what awaited her in the capital, what challenges would come from being the Alpha King's mate, what enemies she might face. But for the first time in 10 years, she faced them unveiled, free, and no longer alone. The story was not over. It was only just beginning.